Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot Nun Dalid. Today's daf is sponsored by Leah Brick in loving memory of her great niece, Nava Tova, who is named after her mother, daughter of Leora and Josh Cherny. Bet Elul would have been her first birthday. May her memory be a comfort to her parents. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf, where the beginning part is a continuation of what we saw yesterday, which was a slew. We already got kind of an inkling into what's going on with this, even though it wasn't so clear. Siman de Gavre Sak Shak Taraf, Me'anav Yimashnia Rusav Anusa. We're going to have 5 questions by 5 different rabbis. The Shak Zaraf is a Rashi Tevot for each of their names. By the way, in the way we do things, if we did an acronym, it would be the first letter of each name. In this case, they don't always do that. Like Shesh is Rav Sheshet, Kuf is Reish Lakish, okay, not exactly, right? Zayin is Rabbi Elazar. It's a little bit different than the way we do things. But anyway, that's for all the different rabbis. And there's 5 questions. None of them are answered. Most of them end in teku, which is short for Tishbi Taretz Kushiyot Bayot, even though it's not really. It's really short for the word tekom, which is it will stand. Okay, Tishbi Taretz Kushiyot Bayot means right, Eliyahu will come in the future and answer our questions. It's an indication that it's something that we don't know the answer to. But literally in Aramaic, it means tekom, this will stand. Okay, the acronym for Tishbi Taretz Kushiyot Bayot probably came much later. In any case, we saw a question about mima'enet, which was interesting in terms of how do we view a woman who refused her marriage when she was married? Do we view it as if there was no marriage at all to begin with, and therefore she goes back to her father's house, and therefore can eat mizonot at her father's house? Right? He's obligated to feed her if he's already dead. Or do we say, no, she was already married. It's like a woman who was married who goes back, and it's not the same thing. We saw there was a machloket tanaim there. That's the only one that doesn't end in a teku, but it does end in a lack of clarity because we end with a machloket. All these questions are going to be about different women and do they get mizonot from their father's estate. The second question is the daughter of a yivama. Does she get from her father? Because remember, if the whole mizonot is connected to the ketuba of her mother, and the ketuba of her mother is dependent on the first marriage, and she's not from the first marriage, she's from the Yabam. So again, does she get mizonot or not? And we had a logic to each side. By Rabbi Elazar. Okay, that was just a quick review without getting into all the details, but now we're up to our question, 2 lines from the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Bet. Bat shnia yesh la mizonot. Now, bat shnia doesn't mean the second daughter, which it sounds like. Second daughter of every family wouldn't get mizonot. I don't know. I'm a second daughter. I mean, the only daughter, but second in the family. Anyway, what it means here is the daughter born to a marriage that was forbidden by rabbinic law. If you remember from Yavama, those who learned, it's called shniyot la'arayot, means secondary arayot. These are secondary forbidden relationships because they're only forbidden by rabbinic law. So if you're the daughter of a marriage that was forbidden by rabbinic law, do you have mizonot? Oh, ein la mizonot, yes or no? Why? What are the 2 sides? Kevan de late laktuba. Okay, we're going to learn this. The rabbis penalized this woman who, okay, truth is both sides should be penalized. It's very, right, we'll get to this when we get, so hold off on it before you get worked up about it. Daf Kuf, we're going to get there, so you have a little while to wait. We're only almost a little over 50 pages into Ketubot, so you have another close to 50 more. Kevan de late la ketuba. So since this woman doesn't get a ketuba, late la mizone, maybe then her daughter wouldn't get mizonot, because again, mizonot to the daughter that was the whole principle here, is part of the ketuba stipulation. This woman doesn't even have a ketuba, so the daughter wouldn't get mizonot. O dilma ima da'avda isura kansura rabbanit. Well, the mother was penalized because she did something wrong, but this woman who happened to be born from this forbidden union to lo avdi isura, she didn't do anything wrong. Maybe lo kansura rabbanit. So again, we're going to split. Right, there's some very interesting things today's daf. One of the elements we're going to talk about, which is also going to come up at the end of the daf, is how much do we view all the different parts of the ketuba, all the stipulations, as one unit, right? Do we say, look, you don't have a ketuba, so the daughters don't get mizonot, because that's part of the stipulation. Your female daughters will get sustained by by their father's estate. Or do you say, no, we can split between these 2? And just because the mother was penalized and doesn't get a ketuba, doesn't mean we're going to penalize this daughter and not give her sustenance when the father dies from the estate of the father. Teku, it ends as usual in a teku. By Rav. Rav now asks, Bat arusa yesh la mizonot, o en la mizonot. The daughter born to an engaged couple. Now, an engaged couple is not supposed to have a daughter. Right? Neither is shniyot l'arayot, right? But if the couple had a child during the time of the engagement, yesh la mizonot o en la mizonot. So now we discussed this issue, and we're going to get back to this also later today about the status of a ketuba for an engaged woman. Kevan de'itla ketuba itla. Do we say, well, she has rights to a ketuba already, so she gets? And this, some people say that we're talking about in a case where he actually wrote a ketuba. Okay, if he didn't write a ketuba, then maybe not. But if he did write a ketuba, we had a whole question about this, right? He's not necessarily supposed to write the ketuba. Usually they write it just before the wedding, but let's say he did anyway. So how much status does it have? If you remember, we distinguished in the past between maybe she already gets the 200 zuz, right? Let's say he dies with the erusin, but maybe she doesn't get the tosefet, the extra. So anyway, kevan de'ila ketuba ila, do we say, look, she has a ketuba, so therefore the daughter gets mizonot? Or do you say, no, well, the rabbis only instituted that someone write a ketuba, give a ketuba to his wife from the time of marriage. So therefore, maybe we'd say no. Okay. It's interesting that you're asking about the Yehuda and the Galil, because Anshe Yehuda would be mityached, but I don't think that's what they're going for here. But again, it could be. This relates back to, there's actually a whole debate here about whether it's forbidden by rabbinic law or only by Torah law for them to have relations when she's betrothed. Again, it wasn't clear in Yehuda they would be mityached. It wasn't clear they were actually having relations. They just went alone in a room together to get to kind of know each other better, whatever that means. It's really not so clear. So it's a good question. Okay, let's move on. So now, buyer of Papa. Bat anusayesh lamizonot. Okay, this is always our difficult case. A man rapes a woman, and according to Torah law, he's supposed to marry her. He also, before he marries her, he's supposed to give 50 shkalim, which is 200 zuz, which is the same amount as the ketuba to her father, as a penalty. If you recall, we had a whole debate. Does he need to give her a ketuba as well, or was that in place of the ketuba? So, if that's the case, so let's see. Okay, again. Does the daughter born to this union, okay, not necessarily she was born when he raped her the first time. We're talking about a daughter born when they're married. So does she get mizonot or not? Aliba de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda lo tibayla. So I said there's this debate. So according to Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda on that side of the debate, it's not a question. Ta'amal yesh la ketuba maneh. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda thinks that she gets a ketuba of 100. Okay, even though he paid already 200 zuz, he has to add additional 100 zuz in the ketuba for her. Why 100 and not 200? Because she's no longer a virgin. Of course, it's his fault. She's no longer a virgin, but she's no longer a virgin, so she's only going to get 100. But she is going to get 100 extra in addition to what he paid the father for the rape. So according to him, there's obviously no question. She has a ketuba, therefore her daughter is going to get mizonot. But my question is according to the rabbis. The rabbi said that the kesef of her ketuba was finished in the knas, right? The penalty he had to pay to the father, that's in place of the ketuba. So she doesn't actually have a ketuba. So Kevin delayed la ketuba, late la mizonot. So do we say, listen, she doesn't have a ketuba, so the daughter doesn't get mizonot? Because again, it's a stipulation of the ketuba. Oh, Dilma, ketuba tama mine. Now this is a little complicated. You have to, it's again, this is like yesterday's stuff. It doesn't exactly say it all, but we'll explain it. What's the reason for ketuba? Maybe the reason is tamamai kedei shelo, or the reason is not maybe the reason, or maybe since the whole reason to give the ketuba is why kedei shelo te kala be'enav lo tzia. The whole reason why the rabbis institute ketuba in the first place is to make sure the husbands don't quickly divorce their wives, get upset one day and say, you're divorced. We don't want that kind of thing happening. So what do? We say, look, you can divorce her if you want, but you're going to have to pay her a lot of money. Right? So therefore, that was the whole reason why they gave this ketuba. Now, this guy, this rapist, is not allowed to divorce her. Remember, he has to stay married to her his entire life, right? The only out is if she wants out, or her father doesn't want to marry her. Okay, but he cannot divorce her otherwise. So, okay, now what does that have to do with anything? That's the tricky part. So therefore what? That's why she doesn't get a ketuba of 200 zuz or 100 zuz or whatever it is, right? Really, it should be 100, according to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda. According to Tanakama, she doesn't get any of that. Why does she not get any of that? Because there's no need for that, okay? Now, what does this have to do with the mizona? Well, remember, we're on the side now where we want to explain why she would get mizona. So in order to explain that, you have to say that, therefore, what can we say? There's different parts of the ketuba, just like we saw before. There's the money that the woman is committed to receive in the case of divorce or death. That's to make sure, obviously, by the way, this isn't the whole reason for ketuba, because it's also in the event of death, right? Not to prevent the husband from dying because he'll have to pay her all this money. So in any case, what we're saying is that in the event of divorce, we want to prevent him from divorcing her, so we make him pay 200 zuz. But there's also some stipulations in the ketuba, they're not connected to that at all. So that element, which is the base of the whole ketuba, is not relevant, and that's why she doesn't get a ketuba. But the stipulations that have nothing to do with that should still be in place. Because remember, even if you don't write a ketuba, the t'naim are still there. So now they're going to go even further and say, perhaps these conditions are unwritten, but they're obvious that the daughter is going to get sustained, because that has nothing to do with the whole divorce issue. So therefore, maybe we can split and say, yes, she doesn't have that part of the ketuba, but this part of the ketuba she would have. So again, Teiku, we don't have an answer. Moving on to the next section in the Mishna, I'm going to go back to Nun Bet Amud Bet for 1 second and read the line again. If you remember, the Mishna listed all these stipulations that are written in the ketuba. You will sit in my home. Okay, this is, you'll see in a second, if you become a widow. Okay, I want you to note the connection between these two things. You're going to sit in my house, meaning we'll house you, and we'll give you food. Kol yemei megar almanutayach bebeiti. Okay, all the days that you're a widow in my house. This in my house is going to be important. Okay, we'll get to that in a little bit. But right now, I'm talking about you will be able to sit in my house. Comes Tani Rav Yosef, he brings a braita, which darshans the words of the ketuba, bibeti velo bibikti. In my house, notice it says not in my hut. So what does that mean? If the orphans all live in a hut, and basically that means, right, there's not a lot of room for this widow to sleep, they're actually not obligated to have her sleep there. So they don't have to give her housing if they're living in a hut. Now this starts this issue, which basically I want to discuss as we go through today's stuff. I want you to think about this, which is the Torah talks about always the ger, yatom, va'almana, right? These are three categories of people that the people are commanded to take care of. Okay, they're people who need extra caring. Okay, the ger, so that we don't exclude them, right? Because often converts feel excluded from the community. We have to go out of our way to make sure they're not excluded. The almana and the yatom is a different category. These are people who, number one, don't have great financial means, and they struggle to, like, they need support of the community. So support from a different way. Now, what's the problem here? We're dealing with a widow and orphans. We're both in categories where we need to help them. And with helping one, we're doing it to the detriment of the other, right? Because she's taking money from the orphans, or, right, the orphans are giving her. And so basically we're struggling here between, it's not a matter of, oh, well, do they not care about the woman? It's not that. It's that they also care about the orphans. So we have to struggle here, okay? We have to struggle to basically help them. Interesting what you're saying, Sarah, which is the divorcee is not mentioned in the Torah as someone who needs caring, even though obviously also people who are divorced also need extra care. Why they don't talk about a divorcee in this way is a good question. Maybe divorce wasn't so common. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a really good question why they don't talk about it. It could be that they view I'm just suggesting maybe, but it could be the word almana could be a general term for a woman who's on her own after marriage. Could be. I don't have proof for that at all. I'm really just throwing it out there. But when they talk about the ger, yatom, and almana, they might just mean any woman who's not married. So yeah, right. Oh, so I assumed. Okay, I'm just reading the chat. I assumed you're talking about in the Torah. In the Gemara, they're not talking about it because the divorcee has a different law here. The divorcee does not get mizonot. Okay, the divorcee gets her ketuba money because there's a clear separation between them, and this is going to be the whole topic of today, which is the almana, right? What divorcee is going to be still living in her husband's house? She's not going to be, of course. Right? This isn't relevant to her. So that's why it's only a widow. The divorcee cuts ties, and therefore she gets her ketuba money right away. Okay, and again, this is the basis for what we're going to talk about today. A widow is different. A widow gets disdain from the household because it's as if the husband's saying, even though I'm not here, I promise to take care of you. A divorce is, I'm not taking care of you anymore, right? We're separating, we're going our separate ways. A widow is still considered part of his household. And the whole big question coming up right now, when we finish this little section, is when is she no longer considered part of his household? Okay, so we're going to get to that in a minute. It's a fascinating question in general. Okay, we'll get back to that. Now, so what does he say? If they don't, right, if they're so poor, right, this is a drasha from the wording of the ketuba, but my house means my house. If I don't have a house and I live in a shack, then no, you're not going to be able to live there. So now they say, but now notice the two lines are connected. You will live in my house and we'll pay your food bills. So the question is, if you're not living in the house, do you still have to pay the food bills? In other words, are those two intertwined? When I have a house, you'll live with me and I'll pay your food bills. But when I don't have a house, I'll do neither. Or is the house just related to the housing issue, not to the food issue? So this is a machloket. Aval mizone ilu. Okay, so when Rabbi Yosef brought this bride, he said, but she does still get sustained. Marbar of Ashi amar afilu mizone nami leila. Okay, mizono, no, not anymore. The late till chatak marbar of Ashi, but we don't hold this way. She does get mizono, even though they don't have a lot. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Now we start one of my favorite sugyot, which is fascinating sugya about when is this woman, okay, as I said a minute ago, we have two things. We have mizono, which is, okay, I keep repeating this because I want it to be super clear. The food is a monthly payment or a weekly payment that she's going to get forever until such time as, question mark, till when does she get mizono? Now, mizono, we just saw, is connected to living in his household. So as soon as she's no longer living in his household, which can mean all sorts of things, we're no longer connected to his house, right? Like imagine, right, you have, this happened, I actually taught this sugya many years ago in Gittin because it comes up, there's reference to this in Masechet Gittin, a very famous story, but maybe we'll mention it today. But it happened, I was teaching it in high school many, many years ago. At the time, the King Hussein of Jordan died, and his wife, Queen Noor, was, right, so she was a freshly, a new widow. And I said to the students, when is she no longer going to be called Queen Noor? At what point? Because at what point is she no longer connected to the household of the kingdom, right? Let's say she goes and marries Joe Schmo. Right? Is she going to be called Queen Noor? Right? Of course not. Nobody would do that because she left, or maybe yes, but it's a question with any kind of situation like this, where you're connected to someone through marriage, and then the marriage is off, and then he dies, and then at what point do you move on? Okay, so it's a very interesting question. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Now notice this is in the name of Shmuel, because Shmuel is going to appear here with a different opinion. Okay, so I want to go back to one more thing. She gets this payment of mizonot until such time as she claimed, right? Until she gets her ketuba money. The ketuba money is the one lump sum. She wants to basically have mizonot as long as she can, as long as she's not desperate for a huge sum of money. If she's desperate for a huge sum of money, then she'll demand her ketuba money, and then that'll be the end of it. Because when you demand your ketuba, you no longer get, okay, and we're going to see that today, but when you get your ketuba, for sure, when you get it, maybe even demand it, but when you get your ketuba money, that's it, no more mizonot. So the woman's best interest, unless she needs a huge lump sum of money, is to keep getting small payments until such time as she gets her ketuba money. But what they're going to say now is it's not fully up to her. We saw in the Mishna there was a machloket in Anshe Yehuda, Anshe Galilee and Yerushalayim. It's up to the woman basically, right? She gets the mizonot till she gets her ketuba. The Anshe Yehuda actually said that the orphans can decide when she doesn't get it. But this seems to be going not in the lines of Anshe Yehuda. We're going to get back to that machloket soon. But in any case, comes Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel, and he says, if someone proposed marriage to her and she agreed, and the mizonot, she can no longer claim mizonot at that point, right? That's pretty much the last stage. She's agreed to get married to someone. This is interesting. This is like the way we call engagement, right? Until now, we always say erusin. This is, she already agreed to get married. That's like what we call engagement nowadays. she doesn't get mizonot anymore. So basically, she can claim her ketuba at that point. Halonit paisa. Although it sounds like from what Shmuel said, what if someone proposed her and she didn't agree to get married? Sounds like yesh la mizonot. She still gets mizonot. So Amar Rav Anan liditi mefarsha leminei demar Shmuel. They explained to me Shmuel in a different way. Depends. Amra machmach ploni bali yesh la mizonot. If she says, I don't want to get married because I still feel very connected to my past husband, my husband who passed. So then she gets mizonot because why? She's still connected to his family. But if she says, I don't want to marry you, machmat b'nei adam she'enam muganim la, because they're just not right for her suitors, ein la mizonot. Then she doesn't get mizonot because she's obviously looking for a husband. She just doesn't like this guy. But already the fact that she's looking for a husband disconnects her from her previous husband's family, and she can't get these payments of food anymore. Amar of Chista, more opinions. Zinta, what if she goes and sleeps around with people? Ein la mizonot. That's also cutting herself off from her husband's family. Amar of Yosef, this is my favorite one. Kichala upirkasa. If she puts on makeup, kichala is usually blue eyeshadow, or she braids her hair, she's already trying to beautify herself for other men. She's already on the lookout. That's already disconnecting her from her husband's house. Very interesting. Here, we don't mean, by the way, a woman who puts on makeup because she just wants to look presentable. We're talking about a woman who puts on makeup particularly to make herself attractive to other people. Right? There's a difference, obviously. We all know that difference. So here they mean, right, she starts dating, she starts going to shadchanim, or, whatever it might be, basically starting to move on, which is this is the opposite of Shmuel. This is a very early stage. Okay, if we go, we have the range. So now the question is, how does this relate to the Zinta one? Manda Amar Zinta, if you say she sleeps around and that already disconnects her, Kol Sheken, all the more so a woman who's looking to get married again. But Manda Amar Kichla Pirkasa, the one who said it's putting on makeup and looking like you want to start dating again, Aval Zinta Itla, this is a fascinating line. He would hold, but if she sleeps around, that doesn't cut her off from her her husband's family. Why? Right? You would think that's pretty bad, but my time Yetzirans. The fact that she's sleeping around is no indicator that she wants to get remarried and cut herself off from her husband's family. It's just that she needed, right? She had a need inside her, Yetzer took her away and made her do that, but that has nothing, basically saying, that theoretically has nothing to do with this at all. This issue is, where is she in terms of her status with her husband? Sleeping around, interestingly, may not be connected to that. Comes the Gemara and says, but we don't actually hold like any of these opinions. Remember, we started with Shmuel. It was Rav Nachman who said the name of Shmuel, but we actually go by what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. One who demands her ketuba in court, and one who goes to court and says, I want my ketuba money. As soon as she says, I want my ketuba money, she can't get mizonot anymore. Okay, I'm not going to tell you the story in Gittin. You're going to have to wait, but it's a crazy story about a woman who basically ends up, as we say, karachat mikanu mikam, bald from all sides. She demands her ketuba. She can't get her ketuba money, but then it's too late for her to get mizonot, and she can't get anything. And she gets very angry and she curses. Hard for me to keep back the story. Anyway, it's a great story. We'll get to it within the next year. Okay, so now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Below, it's probably in about a year. Okay, so now we say, wait a minute. Velo, really? Can't get mizonot, but there's a Braita which lists all sorts of cases and it doesn't list that case. Tanya. She sells her ketuba. We talked about that yesterday. She sells her ketuba to someone else. Or mishkenak ketubata, she uses the collateral for a loan. Or astak ketubata apotiki lachil. She basically says, I'm going to owe you money for something, and here's a field. If I don't pay you, take it from this field, and which is the field that my husband committed to me in the ketuba. Ein la mizonot. Okay, all those things basically are considered as if she collected her ketuba already. So since it's as if she collected her ketuba, she doesn't get mizonot, which sounds like hani'in aval tovat lo. It doesn't list here tovat ketubata bebeitin, so it sounds like just those and not the case Shmuel said. So how could Shmuel go against this Braita? Hane ben bebeitin ben shelo bebeitin. Because these three listed here are whether she does these in court or doesn't do them in court. Court is not a relevant factor here. However, tovat bebeitin in shelo bebeitin lo. If she goes to the Atomium and says, I want to get my ketuba, she doesn't lose mizonot. But if she goes to the court to say it, then that's like a big statement saying, I'm disconnecting myself. At that point, she can't get mizonot anymore. So what they're saying is those we're talking about cases that are done in and out of the court. It doesn't matter where you did them. Since this one is only in the court, therefore it wasn't listed here in the Braita. Continuing on. So now we have this machloket Yerushalayim Yehuda again, whether the Yatomim have the power to say we no longer want to give you mizono. Do they have the rights to do that? So you're going to see this this line where Rav is going to be on this is where I said it's kind of who has more rights. Who are we caring about more, the orphans or the women? So Rav is on the side of the orphans and Shmuel is on the side of the women. So Rav says, and this comes up in Gitin also in certain things. Rav amar halachakan sheyuda. We give the Yatomim the power to say, no more mizono, take your lump sum and leave us alone. Shmuel amar halachakan she'agalil. Shmuel says, no, paskin the other way. It's the women's rights. Bavel v'chol parpata nahu kiran. Okay, Babylonia and all the surrounding areas did like Rav. Nahardea v'chol parpata. Obviously, it wasn't all of Bavel because Nahardea is in Bavel. I mean, one area of Bavel did like Rav. Nahardea v'chol parpata. Right, all the surrounding areas of Nahardea nahu kishmua. Hahi bat mechoza. So there was a case. Right, this is what you call minagamakom, custom of the city. So there was a place, Hahi bat mechoza, a woman who came from Mechoza, which is considered Babylonia. But she was married to a guy from Nahardea. You can already see where this is going. It came before Rav Nachman. Shama lekala debat Mechoza. He heard a rumor that she was from Mechoza. Amar lehu, babel b'chol parvata nahu kirav. You're from Mechoza, and in Mechoza they go like Rav, which means the Yatomim can decide that you don't get mizonot anymore. Amrule, they said to him, Bahala Nahardea Nesiba, but wait, she's married to a guy from Nahardea. Amar Lehu, he says to them, Ihachi Nahardea b'chol parpata nahu kishmol. Well, then, if her husband's from Nahardea, then the custom is like Nahardea, and then she can get her mizonot. Adhecha Nahardea, how do you know the border? Adhecha desage kaba de Nahardea. This is a very interesting explanation or interesting answer, not what you would have expected. If they use the measuring implements of Nahardea, there are obviously different measuring, and it's like metrics versus, right, meters or inches or feet, right, what you go by. So that is an indicator of which area you go by. That's how we determine the border. Very interesting answer. A kav is a volume, a measurement of volume. We go by that. Itmar, another issue, which is a very interesting issue. Almana Rav Amal Shamin Masha Aleha. Ushmuel Amar Ein Shamin Masha Aleha. Here they're consistent within their approaches. When you have a widow, okay, this is a great, all these sugyot are fabulous in terms of thinking about them. What happens with all the clothes that her husband bought her? She now has a whole wardrobe of her husband, clothes he bought her. When she goes to demand the ketuba money, can the orphans say, we're deducting all your clothing, your whole wardrobe, because that's money that you got, that you're getting right now. You're basically walking off with objects of value. So Rav says, Shami Mashallah, we evaluate what she's wearing and we deduct it from the ketuba. Ushmuel Amar Ein Shami Mashallah. We do not evaluate her clothing. Her clothing is her clothing. Okay, which is a fascinating question, right? And we'll get to it a little bit more in a minute. Right? It's like I was thinking in my house. I have a lot of girls. They share clothing, and sometimes they argue over clothing. And what do you say as a parent always? Don't, like, it's mine, right? And I always say, what do you mean it's yours? It's not yours, it's mine. I bought it, right? Who are you to have rights to it? And it's a fascinating question. Is it yours or not? Is it like I gave my clothes to my kids and it belongs to them? Or is it really mine and really doesn't belong to any one of them? So, right, it's a good question. So here goes our sugya, very interesting sugya. First of all, the next thing they say is chilufa velakit. They flip shitot when it comes to a worker who works in your house, and you clothe them. So does their clothing get deducted from their salary? It's a good question, right? So according to this, the first reading, they flip sides, which seems a little strange. On the other hand, again, this isn't really, right? It's this issue, again, who do we care more about? Yatom or the almanah? So if you flip shitot, it could be more because you're worried more about, the owner or the worker. I don't know. It's a good question why it would be flipped. But in case you're curious, right, in case you're concerned, why would you flip it? Well, Rav Kahana Mane B'chein, he says they actually have the exact same machloket about a worker. Umanach basimana, and Rav made a siman for his opinion. Yatma ba'armalata shlach upuk. Yatom, which is a reference to the lakit, the day worker, and the armalata is the widow. Shlach upuk, take off your clothes and leave. Okay, meaning there's actually many different interpretations to this. I like the one that says basically either take off your clothing and go and get your whole, like it's up to you. If you take off your clothing, right, you'll get more money. But if you don't, you'll have to deduct money. So it's up to you what you want to do. Obviously, he's not suggesting people walk around naked, right? I assume they just mean, I don't know, wear the item that's the least, leave all your expensive clothing so that you can get more of your ketuba money. Anyway, okay. Amar Rav Nachman says, even though it's a Mishna that seems to side with Shmuel, we actually hold like Rav. First, we're going to bring the Mishna, show how it holds like Shmuel, and then we're going to say, well, if the Mishna seems to hold like Shmuel, why are we holding like Rav? Someone who gives the value of all of his possessions to the temple, or he gives his own value. He doesn't have to give. When he says all my possessions go to the temple, it doesn't include his wife's clothes. It doesn't include his son's clothes. It doesn't include the dye that he dyed his clothes, that they're clothes for them, or sandalim, brand new sandals that they never wore, but that he bought for them. Okay, even if they never wore them, meaning it's considered their own. Right here, you see the two sides. And that seems to all like Shmuel, that we don't deduct it because they're hers. So here's an interesting line. So I don't understand. If the Mishnah seems clear like Shmuel, why did you hold like Rav? When you look, Rehita is quick. When you take a quick look at that Mishnah, it seems to hold like Shmuel. But when you really look into it and think about it, you realize it's clear there the halacha is like Rav. Why? My timer. What's the reason? In the Mishnah, it talked about her clothes are her own. Why? Because he bought them for her so that she could wear them when she's married to him. But he didn't give her clothes so that she could wear them when she's not married to him. In other words, right? You give clothes to your wife so she look pretty, so she's dressed nice, while you're married to her. If she's going to leave the marriage, or in the event that you're not married anymore, even if you die, but basically, right, it's interesting because you wouldn't really think this way, but you could say that at this point, the clothes, they change status according to this. Basically, when they're married, the clothes are her own. So if he says, all my property, it doesn't include her clothing. But when she's no longer married to him, the clothes are not her own. Of course, she still needs clothes, but we're basically going to say, those clothes you're taking from the husband's estate. So we're just going to deduct that from your ketuba money, okay? It makes sense, actually, right? There's a certain logic to it, which, it's not so fair to her, but there is a certain logic to it. How they evaluate what the clothes are worth is also a good question. They use clothing at this point. So it's also a question. So now we get to a story. Kalata debei bar el Yeshuv hava katava ketubata miyat. Okay, the daughter-in-law of Bar el Yeshuv went to the Yatomim to get her ketuba. So now they bring her, right? They go to court, right? They bring her to court. And when they bring her to court, they say to her, Amre, right? They trick her and they say, Zila la milta desizlehachi. You're not really so well dressed. Maybe you should get dressed nicer. Okay. Oh, she brings them to court. Sorry. Thank you for the correction. I've come a matya. I see. It's coming matya. Right. She brought them to the court. Thank you. So she demanded they go to the court so she can get her money. And they say to her, you're not really dressed so nicely. So she basically goes get dressed and she wears all her clothing. Okay, what this exactly means is a good question. Maybe it just means she brings like her finest clothing. She gets dressed up in the most expensive clothes she has. They go before Ravina. Amar Lahu. Says, oh, you want your ketuba? Well, we hold like Rav here. We're going to take off, deduct all your clothing. And, right, and basically they deducted everything she was wearing. Now, the question, first of all, is Masha Aleha, does it mean literally what's on her and they wanted her wearing the most expensive clothes? So basically we take off the most, or does it mean that in the end, if they deduct all her wardrobe, what's the difference whether she wore it or not? What were they trying to trick her into? But it seems like they wanted her to show all her clothing, because otherwise she could claim, oh, this is he'll say, what are your clothes valued at? And she'll say what they're valued at, and I'll trust her. When really maybe she's hiding all these clothes at home that she's going to take with her. And that's why maybe they wanted to have her bring everything to court. And therefore, right, hard to imagine what this means exactly. She was wearing all of her clothes. Anyway, it's an interesting story. What if somebody says, I'm giving this, right? The father promises the daughter for her dowry, X amount of money, or specific items. Usually it's items. I'm going to give you the candelabra. I'm going to give you this, right? Whatever it is. Now, what happens when she goes to demand her ketuba money? She wants all of her nedunya from the orphans. Zal nedunya, what if the value of silver went down? And now all the silver that he promised her, all the gold, is no longer worth what it was worth before. So the question is, does he have to give her the value or does he give her the gold? So Rabbi Yochanan Purana liyatme. They basically end up paying less money. Okay, they'll give the value of the items the way they were at the time. There was someone who said, I'm giving 400 zuz worth of wine to my daughter for the dowry. In this case, the price went up. Also, though Yatomim went out, okay? And I'm Rav Yosef Rav Chaliyatme. The Yatomim went out. I'm going to side on the Yatomim side, and she's going to get whatever 400 zuz worth. Let's say it bought 100 bottles of wine, and now it buys, right, Arbameo Zuze. Sorry, the price went up, so it's only 90, right? That amount of money will only buy you 90 bottles of wine. They only have to give her 90 bottles of wine. So either which way, we're going to side with the Yatomim. Kreve de Rabbi Yochanan. You might remember, I hope you do, the story of Rabbi Yochanan who tried to help his relatives and then felt bad about it, that he advised them what to do before. So in another case, it seems his relatives got wind of the fact that Rabbi Yochanan was very helpful to them. So the relatives of Rabbi Yochanan come with an interesting question. Havlu itat abba, they had a wife of their father's. The father was still alive, but she ate a lot of food. And they got worried, if our father dies, I knew you'd like this. The father dies, she's going to eat up our entire inheritance. So how can we protect ourselves, right? How classic is it that the children, while the parents are still alive, are already worrying about what's going to be, right? This obviously wasn't their mother. And they were worried, what's going to be with us, trying to deal with, So what happens? So they go to Rabbi Yochanan for some advice. Now the children, not the father, the children. Amar Luhu, Amru Luhu avuchon. Go advise your father, right? Classic. The kids try to tell the parents, what you should do to protect us in the event that you die. Always a little uncomfortable situation. So they say to the father, you should say to the father, he tells them, set aside a part of the land for her, give her a piece of land for her to eat. Okay, it's not clear, by the way. I see you asked if it was their mother. I don't think it was their mother because it says he had a wife. It sounds like he had a different wife, but could be. It would also seem weird that they would be trying to get their mother out of things, but maybe. It's tough to know. In any case, he says, set aside a piece of property. And by the way, the halacha would be no different whether it was their mother or wasn't their mother. It would just be a little ruder that they were doing this to their own mother. But in any case, he says, set aside a piece of land and tell her this is where you're eating mizona from. And that way it's finite and she won't just keep taking all your food. That will be designated to her. And you can apparently do that to avoid paying the mizona, right? So it's not you're avoiding paying the mizona, you're going to get mizona from their exclusive. So now, Atu the Kamei de Reish Lakish. Why they did this, I have no idea. But they went in front of Reish Lakish with the same question. Maybe they thought maybe we could get something even better. Amar Lehu, what a crazy ruling. If he dedicates a field to her, that's only for extra mizono. Okay, basically, if the father had said, take from this property, when he says that, he basically means in the event that it's not enough with the orphans can sustain you, you can take from this field as well. So basically, that's not going to help you at all. Amrule, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Hachi. They said, but Rabbi Yochanan didn't tell us this. Amar Lahu, Zilu habu la. You better give her mizonot. V'i lo, and if not, mefikna lechula Rabbi Yochanan. I'm going to take Rabbi Yochanan out of your ears, meaning I'm going to make sure you don't remember this halacha of his at all. In other words, you better listen to what I'm saying and give her mizonot. Okay, so you're saying the Kohen said he died. I'm assuming he died later. In the beginning, obviously, the father was still alive. And then when he died, you're saying maybe when he died, that's when they went to Reish Lakish. That's a possibility. Maybe they went to implement it and they went to Reish Lakish's court to implement it. That's possible. That makes more sense. So now, Amar Lahu, Rabbi Yochanan. So they go back to Rabbi Yochanan and they say, this was the advice you gave us. Amar Lahu, what do you want me to do? Reish Lakish disagrees with me. My hands are tied, which is interesting because he had more status than Reish Lakish. But I assume also once Reish Lakish ruled, there was nothing he could do. Amar Rabbi Avav, there's actually a disagreement about this line, whether Rabbi Yochanan actually changed his mind, or he was just being a little more specific here. Amar Rabbi Avav, Lididi Mefarshel Minei Rabbi Yochanan. We had the same language as Shmuel earlier in today's daf. They explained to me Rabbi Yochanan's opinion a little bit more clearly. Amar limizono riba limizono. If the husband had dedicated this land for mizonot, that means he was adding it. You can take from this land extra if you need extra. Amar bimizonot, but if he says for your payment, okay, it's a little hard in the English to translate le and bit, but le is for like with the open kind of thing, and bit is in place of your mizonot, okay, and therefore katzatz la mizonot, and it actually will work. So it depends on how it's worded. And with that, hadron alach na'ara, and we finish the 4th chapter. Moving on now to the 5th chapter. It's a funny name. It's called, the chapter is Afalpi, because that's what starts, which is even though. Now, the beginning of this, most of this Mishna is a repeat from things we at least addressed, and some of them we saw explicitly inside before. Even though they said that a virgin gets 200 for her ketuba and a widow 100, if he wanted to add even 100 zuz, he's allowed to. Gemara is going to ask, why do you need to tell us this? Isn't it pretty obvious? I mean, obviously anyone can add what they want. We'll get back to that. Nit armala onit garsha, if she was widowed or divorced, beimena erusin, beimena nisuin, this is the machloket we saw before, whether it's from the betrothal or whether it's from the marriage, govat hakol, she gets everything, right? Let's say he wrote her a ketuba when she was betrothed, she'll get everything in the ketuba besides the 200, whatever additions there were. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer, mena nisuin, govat hakol. Mena erusin, betula gova matayim v'almana mana, shelo katav la'el manat l'kansa. The whole addition was only in the event that they got married. He was giving her extra so that she would actually marry him. But if they never got married, then she doesn't get the extra. She only gets the basics, okay, the 200 or the 100. So that's a machloket about what she gets from Erusin in the event that he wrote her more, and in the event that he wrote it when they were betrothed, would she get it or not if she's divorced or widowed from that? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, another machloket we saw before. If he wants, he can write. He writes her 200, and she writes a document that says, I got 100 of it. Even if she didn't really get 100, she's basically saying, mochelet, we saw this just the other day, right? I'm foregoing, we saw it yesterday, I'm foregoing my ketuba. Or an almana maneh, or if it was for a widow, 100, right? She says, I already received half. Obviously, it doesn't have to be half, it could be any amount. She could basically say, yeah, I received half, even though she didn't. She's basically foregoing part of the rights of her ketuba. Rabbi Meir Omer, it's like sleeping with a woman. It was a process, outside of marriage, basically. Okay, you're not really married if you do that. You have to give her the full amount. Okay, he's protecting the woman here. So the Gemara says, Pshita. The first line is obvious. Of course, you can add money if you want. You might have thought, Kitsuta after Rabbanan. Maybe the rabbis put a set amount on it, so that we don't embarrass people who don't have. This comes to teach you, no, you can. You can add more as you wish. Now, this is a whole interesting thing about, right? Like I see Ruthie writing like funerals, right? At funerals, we have the whole thing with the burial shrouds, and Rabban Gamliel put, right, very basic burial shrouds, even though he was very wealthy. Here in this case, we say the opposite, though. He could add if he wants, maybe also because it's protecting the woman, as opposed to burial shrouds where it's not really that important. I mean, maybe some people view it as very important, but anyway, it's all a question. This, by the way, comes up. Where does it come up? So in America, custom is often everyone has the same tosefet. There's a standard amount and it's added to the ketuba, and there's a standard amount for the nedunya, and that's it. In Israel, it's much more flexible. And some people write, I don't know what the minhag is in all other places. I do know those two minhagim. In Israel, everyone adds their own tosefet, and often you'll see at a wedding, they don't read that part out loud, specifically because it's embarrassing. It's something private. They don't read it out loud. But in America, it's all the same, so it doesn't matter. They read it. Okay. There's a bunch of differences between America and Ketubot and Israeli Ketubot in general. We'll mention them as they come up. Okay, last thing for today, im ratzah lahosif. If he wanted to add to the ketubah, he could. Ratzah lichtov la lo katani. It doesn't say if he wants to write something extra, he can. It says ela ratzah lahosif if he wants to add. So Messiah le Rabbi Ivu am Rabbi Yanai. This supports what Rabbi Ivu said in the Rabbi Yanai. The am Rabbi Ivu am Rabbi Yanai. T'na'ei ketuba kiktuba dami. The ketuba is the conditions of a ketuba are like a ketuba itself. That's what they're saying. From the fact that it says lohosif, to add and not to write to her, because to write to her could be a separate document. Here they're saying that any stipulations made in the ketuba, like the tosefet, have the law of the ketuba itself. Nafkamina, what's the relevance of this? So I'll give you the first one, and then we'll go through the whole long list tomorrow. Limocheret. For example, if you sell your ketuba, so you've sold your ketuba with the tosefet, and that's what they're learning from the words lohosif. If you add and not if you wrote her, because if you wrote her, that could be a separate document, then she could sell the ketuba and still demand the tosefet because those are two separate. That's not the case, and we learn it from here because it says if you want to add means add it to the ketuba itself, which means all sorts of rules that apply to the ketuba, which we're going to read one by one. All these cases tomorrow. It's all one package deal. So even though it's an addition as part of the package of the entire ketuba. With that, we'll finish for today. I hope you enjoyed the daf with all the interesting issues that came up that really are issues that you can understand in real terms in terms of, our daily lives. Have a great day, everyone.